Okay. So I just thought to introduce Makiko by way of my personal contact with her, and I would like to read her bio. I've known Makiko since 2005 when we worked for Yokohama Triennale, and I got to work with her more closely through our engagement with Koganecho Bazaar in Yokohama from 2013 to 2014. We started to reconnect with each other last year. In March of 2020, the world was placed under lockdown. Existing problems became ever more visible worldwide. Regardless of where we are, we witness and live the reality threatened by hatred, violence, and discrimination. The social mechanism of classifications, which separates one class or gender from the other, is grappling an increasing control over our life to an inhuman degree. Situated in social and ecological turmoil, urgent questions arise. Questions about our own practice and our relation to a larger world as a human being. Why do we do this? Why do we continue? How do we keep ourselves alive? Makiko's reciprocal, mindful, and critical curatorial practice offers various cues for us to address these endless, discursive, yet urgent questions. Her practice challenges the conventional framework of curation, going over the confinement of exhibition making. At the core of her curatorial practice is the punk spirit that she carries since when she was a little child. Okay, so I'm gonna read her bio. Makiko Hara is a freelance curator, lecturer, researcher, writer, and art incubator born in Tokyo, Japan, and lives and works in Vancouver, Canada. Makiko was a chief curator and lately deputy director at Center A, Vancouver International Center for Contemporary Asian Art from 2007 to 2013. Since 2014, when Hara had served the guest curator for Koganecho Bazaar, Fictive Communities Asia in Yokohama, Japan, her practice has shifted for creating platforms for dialogue and exchange through numerous art forms across the Pacific Ocean and beyond. In 2019, Hara co-founded a curatorial initiative, Pacific Crossings, with 3 other curators and directors based in British Columbia, Canada, and have organized several research residency, lecture, and forum with partner organizations globally in Tokyo, Manila, Hong Kong, among others. Hara is working on an ongoing long-term research project, Kitchen Talks, Women, Aging, and Art Making, examining the transformation of women artists' art practices as they age with wisdom. This research has led her several recent projects, including Being My Mother, her own performance at Through the Trap Door, curated by Paul Wong, Vancouver in 2014, and curated 2 female artists before the 37 trillion pieces Get to Sleep, performance by Tairi Ito, Live International Performance Art Biennale Vancouver in 2019, and Unlikeliness exhibition by Elizabeth Mackenzie, Tech Gallery, Simon Fraser University, Vancouver in 2020. Hara was appointed as the direction advisor of International Exchange Center at Akita University of Art from 2017 to 2020, and currently in charge of their participation to the October School since 2018. During the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, Hara opened My Kitchen Anthropology Museum in her own apartment kitchen and appointed a CEO and executive director of the museum. Okay, so it is my pleasure and honor to have Makiko with us today. Okay, the floor is yours now, Makiko.
Thank you, Mayumi. It's so nice to see everyone, some new friends, but old friends from different time. And I'm also make me nervous that 2 senior I admire is sitting. And it's so nice to see Yamano-san and Randy together, which they become really bounded friends in 2014. That's the Koganecho Bazaar. I work with Mayumi. And that's actually really changed my way of working with art and in many ways. And I'm really grateful for Yamano-san to call me a week after I lost my job by chance, by coincidence, maybe or not. Maybe he felt like I'm in trouble. And from that time, I'm very happy that to reunion with Mayumi and got to know Mark and got to connect it with Philippines in a place that I really a long times I wanted to know because of my very old friends that who actually influenced me to come to Canada, Rani Maestro. And I'm very happy to meet with Neo, that I heard a lot about you. And so it's a great pleasure to be today. And so as Mayumi told you that today I'm not your teacher and I'm not giving lectures, but more to share my experience. It's almost experience with a very prominent, famous art on Kawara in 2007. But I want to share the story, and the story contained very challenging but interesting questions, which I cited here first. He asked me, what is the art in 21st century? In a long telephone conversations I happened to have in 14 years ago. So these questions, please keep in your mind when you're listening my story, then we can discuss about that after. So I'm gonna probably talk maybe half an hour or so. And then as Mayumi said that please feel free to interrupt me while I'm talking. You can, what is that? There's so many functions. Did you notice? This Zoom, you have so many like live transcript and security and breakout rooms and reactions. You can do either reactions, raising hand, or just, keep the video or write in the chat. I gonna respond in my capacity, in my conversation. And also plenty of times we have discussed after. And I gave you some reference text before my talk, but it's not necessarily examining a text. It's not the reading material, but it's how many people read or just take a look or okay. Thank you. Thank you. And so yeah, those text, it's come from this book that it's a Phaedon's series, those series of contemporary artists, and there's a bunch of, Ai Weiwei and those famous artist things. And then this book I was gifted by friends. And from there's a huge, long essays by Jonathan Watkins on Kawara and few others. But I didn't give you the whole essays because this talk is not about Onkawara actually, but I wanted to give some kind of reference, particularly a few key works I'm going to talk today, especially of this ones, the postcard series and the telegram works that he made and sent during his trip all over the world in 1960s to 70s. It's called I Am Still Alive. The series is the kind of starting point of my conversation with Onkawara. And also related to that, Faydon's book, I sent you one PDF of this book, Pure Conscious. It's a short text, both in English and Japanese, this one, but there's a bunch of different series. That's a series that Onkawara did in the 90s. And then the text is not directly related to the walks, but I will examine it later. But the text itself is really beautiful text about the grandpa in the riverside of Shimanto River, written by the canoeist. So I thought give some kind of ideas about who is Onkawara. I'm sure everyone knows Onkawara, right? Is anyone's have no idea who is this? It's okay. Just raise a hand.
So I asked the question to the class before, and obviously he's not so known here in the Philippines. So I mean, we didn't know, the class didn't necessarily know much about him.
But to get the sense now,
yeah,
a little bit. Okay. So anyway, my story back to 2007 when I moved to Canada by invitations of my old friend Hank Wu, who was my boss at the Center A. And so I got to be a senior curator at Center A, which Mayumi introduced. That is really long name, International Center for Contemporary Asian Art. That sounds like a big institution, but it's actually a very small gallery, run by 3 staff, more or less, and located in downtown East Side in Vancouver, which is considered, and based on Wikipedia, it's a worst slum in North America. So it's a contemporary Asian gallery, but we have to deal a lot of social issues around a gallery. And that was not what I expected to get the job. Anyhow, I had to deal with that situation. And so first year I moved, it's already have some programs was confirmed. So my own curatorials is only started around year after. My first show was Koki Tanaka. So it was in December, and I appointed in January. So it's almost a year later. So when about this time, or maybe a little bit more close to summer, about 14 years ago, I was walking in the gallery and start thinking about what exhibition I want to make in the context of contemporary Asian art, which actually I never curated specifically Asian art. So my knowledge at the time was very limited. I more curated Canadian art or European art, or in contemporary general. So it was challenging new life. And in some reasons, I've been interested in working on the topics about life and death, or concept of that at the time. And so I start brainstorm about a group show. And then I don't know how the curators work. Everybody has a different method, but for my case, I start with something like artworks or artist or idea or whatever. But that time I start, brainstorm of several artists I wanted to work. But suddenly the work of Onkawara's very particular work, it's called I'm Still Alive. I saw probably about 10 years ago or more older, a documentary or somewhere in Europe. It was just a piece of telegram in the frame. But that work really triggered me more and more. This one, like, it's a piece of paper, but the ideas of I'm still alive really stuck on my mind, and curious that I wanted to start with that work to develop my concept. And so in order to do that, I wanted to have that work in my show. So, you know, if your institution, like very strong, big institution curators, you probably not contact artists, but you probably search of the museum collections or whatever to learn the work or to find available work before contact with an artist, possibly. But my gallery was not like museum, and also I didn't know how to get the work. And I asked my mentor at the time, he passed away last year, but Masashi Ogura, who is onkawara's contemporary, and then has a lot of friendship in the 60s, maybe, before moved to New York. And I asked him, how can I get in contact with Kawara and get his piece of work? And he said, call him up. I said, no way. I can't call him up. And he said, Onkawara love talk with young artists and young curator. He's famous with that. And he doesn't accept email. And so it's only way you can call him up. And he gave me the phone number. And of course, like, I'm puzzling, like, how can I tell him? But I did it. And so it's a long, like Vancouver, at the time, nobody had the iPhone. So it's not WhatsApp on things. So that's, I'm afraid about my phone charge. So I asked my director, Hank, can I call to New York for the long distance? He said, yeah. Who are you calling? I said, Onkawara. I said, holy shit, like, how do you know Onkawara? I said, oh, Masashi knows, whatever. So I called him and didn't expect it. Long distance call really long, of course, he's a famous artist. And so I introduced myself. I introduced that I got your numbers from Masashi Ogura, blah, blah, blah. And then I asked him, I'm calling you that I'm interested in to have a group show. And the titles of your artworks, I'm still alive. And then he immediately said, well, nice to see you. How is Ogura-san, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, I am not interested in exhibition at all. So I thought, oh my God, it's instant rejection, right? I felt like, okay. My mind was, okay, I have to find some other sources, blah, blah, blah. It was, and then he said, by the way, where are you living? And he said, I'm living in Vancouver. I just moved here, blah, blah. And he said, oh, you live in Vancouver. I'm good friend with Jeff Wall, who invited me like about 10 years ago to Vancouver. Vancouver is such a nice city, that he starts having a chat. I said, okay. So I thought, okay, that's very interesting. And he was very casual. It's to be truth, I wasn't really a big fan of Onkawara until I really talked to him. The work of him. It's very interesting conceptually, but I thought it's a very cold, minimal, already confirmed, and he's a kind of artist for me already in history. So I just wanted to have that work to start develop ideas, but wasn't really study even about onkawara to be shamed. But he was really like talking like some distant uncle almost. And then he'd been talking about how he enjoyed sea fishing with Jeff Wall. And he said, that Vancouver is a nice city and blah, blah. And then he asked me, like he totally not into the exhibition things. So I can't bring it back. So I just listening of him. And then he asked me, well, exhibition making, you probably a curator, so you study or whatever, is very 19th century. I said, okay. And so I'm not interested in that form anymore. So, but as a curators, whatever, what do you think the art in 21st century? So that the question was thrown to me right from the beginning. So I had to think, but of course I can't answer. It's a big question. And then I don't even know what context he's talking about. And then he started giving a very elaborate lectures about art history, and which is very interesting. It's very critical in a way that he said, I'm living in New York now, long time. And I think the New York, what do you think? Well, I said, well, it's interesting city, blah, blah, blah. I said, I think New York is haunted by Marcel Duchamp. And that conceptual art is really a last century. And so I have to think, what does it mean? And then he not really engage conversation, but he's posing all those kind of anecdote one after another. And then he said, Vancouver is 21st century city or place, but New York is not, Paris is not, Tokyo is not. Okay. In what sense? I asked him. In what sense? And he started talking about his sea fishing and how he enjoys sea fishing and all those things. So it's very kind of mysterious conversation. And then he also talked me about mathematician, Indian mathematician, who invented a theory in the 1920s, maybe. But he was very, how to say, outsider. I forgot his name. I always forget his name, so I made note. Srivasa Ramanujan. Do you know? Maybe not. He actually died when he was really young, like a 32 or something, in 1920. And his mathematics was not formed in academic, because he dropped off from Cambridge University. And so, but recently, he became a movie called The Man Who Knew Infinity. So his mathematics was about infinities. Yes, that's it. Thank you, Jerome. So what's infinity mathematic, you know? So it's a kind of pose as a questions, and so many following young mathematician try to reveal or understand what he tried to say. So it's mathematics, it's not about the theory of formation, but it's a concept which is not in the institutions of mathematics at the time, and still probably not. So he talking about how interesting of the discovery of mathematics, for example. Or he talking about, this was written on his book too, so that's why I gave you some copy, but he talking about Altamia's cave paintings, how impressed he has when he was visiting, when he was younger, first time in Spain, and that experience to really get into the Altamia's, one of the oldest cave painting, that was for him, he said it was awakened experience as to understand the art before language. So it's interesting because that drawing is depicted without concept of art, right? So it was depicted for other reasons or for something else, which for someone like us is a very different to understand of what the purpose of that. So Onkawara talking about how, you know, don't forget the question of what's the art in 21st century, which bring back what is an art or something else, creation or making drawing or making painting of that time. What's the difference? You know, all those things. So my mind was just stretching around while I'm listening of Onkawara's talk. So it was probably over an hour and a half. My boss, Hank, was looking at me like, how long you talking? You know, you must be using for the long distance, and it's already an hour and a half. So I was kind of, but this is on Kawara's, I can't hang it up, you know. So that's my first conversation was about an hour and a half to get those very rich lecture. And then he asked me, I forgot why you call me. I said, oh, I'm calling you to ask you for the exhibition. Say, forget about that. But call me back exact 2 weeks from now at the exact same time. Bye-bye. You know, that was my experience. And then of course I have to call in 2 weeks, have to research everything that he mentions about mathematicians or communists, you know, that's the cave paintings and Jeff Wall. Of course, I know Jeff Wall, but you know, and he talking about chess, he talking about smoking, he talking about, you know, like, so I make a note and, you know, like think all those questions and then call him back. And then he did almost the same thing. And then not, you know, like it's not much, how to say, no answer anyway. And I knew that this, when this question was given, he will never give me answer. And then maybe this question will never get answer. That's very nature of his work. You know, that, oh, by the way, in between the 2 weeks, I bought this book, I think, or I borrow a book and then maybe I keep it. So I read it and try to understand. And And then more so that I think of what's the motivation of me to calling to Onkawara was about that I'm still alive. Telegram walk I wanted. So I have to think about what does it mean, really. And it's very interesting the way that walk is sent from wherever he was traveling to his close friend or someone's in art world, like in gallerist or whoever he knows. And the telegram at that time, probably all those you, except Randy and Yamano-san, telegram is not very common things, right? Because we have email, we have online, social media, texting, but until recent, probably we use telegram as the fastest communications method before the telephone, or or maybe even with a telephone. Telegram was sent from the postal office to the persons as agent matters. For example, your mother is in a deathbed, or your father died, come back. That kind of very short text, but it's kind of not necessarily a good news. Mostly it's kind of bad news or emergency situation or something difficult news being delivered by telegram most of the case. And so Onkawara intentionally using that and then putting only the message, I am still alive. But there's an interval between when he sent from, for example, in France to receive in Japan, maybe a day or half day or something passed. That's the very statement really bring you to the question, what does it mean? Is he really still alive? Or he was still alive, but he maybe not alive anymore. We don't know. That's just one sentence really bring you to this a time between that. And intentions and all those things, it's really up in the air. We don't know. We can't really know what does this means. And that's very interesting for me. I start, understand onkawara in a very different way. It's more like kind of more living human with these conversations. So anyway, I won't go details. You can ask me more detail, whatever you're interested in. But after 2 telephone calls, maybe total about 3 hours, he told me, you're very welcome to come to my studio and we can keep this conversation whenever you want. And yeah, next time come to my studio in New York. But no conversation about the exhibition. So I said, okay, I drop off. It was very certain for me, I can't ask him, can I borrow your work? Because for him, it's a nonsense, right? So this is my failure as a curator, but it was a gift for me as a curator to think about that such a big questions. And then somehow this question and conversation stay in my mind like implanted since then. And so occasionally, whenever I do things, making show or working with an artist, that question always stuck in my mind. And definitely that's effect of how I see the art or how I see the world even. And a week later, I received a package from Onkawara in his handwriting. And surprise, that was 13 books, mentioned 13 books of this size, very small books of his recent project called Pure Conscious. And it was all in a different language. It's like it was the project he started in 1997, something like that, and then carry on for a couple of years. And it's only remain as a document in this book. And so I learned that this Pure Conscious is a project that he worked with a curator or whoever wanted to work with him to put 7 date paintings that he made from the January 1st, 1997, continuous 7 days, date paintings on the kindergarten of the town that the curators or whoever's that want to work with, but display in the wall in the kindergarten. But because of the kindergarten, for security reason, no one can get in except the kids and teacher and sometimes parents. No audience, no art people, only allowed to have some snapshot like this. But the picture was carefully taken for not the kids aware about they were taking the pictures. So it was just a document and then pure experience for kids to live with the 7 paintings for months or 3 months. And he chose only 5 to 6 years old kids. Duration is differ from different projects, but probably about a month to 3 months, short period of time. And there seems like a rules that Onkawara made is to not allowed for any teacher who are with kids to explain what it's about. So it was just there. And together with many, like kids painting and all those things. So it was be part of the life for certain period of time. That's it. And he named it Pure Conscious, which is very, very interesting because for me, I don't know how I take this to go with my comment and the questions what the pure conscious really mean. And that's also I want to talk with you today. And basically that's this opportunity, it's really for me not talking about curatorial or exhibition or that's things, but more about, especially now in this COVID over years experience, that we are all, as Mayumi explained in the beginning, that we are all in a very strange state of mind about more or less kind of existentialist level of question, like why this happening to us, right? So this new situation we're confronting, or we are kind of adapting, or whatever we call. I think each of us might think because everybody has a very different art practice, but what really mean for us to continue the art practice or engage with art, and what's really art mean it's become a pretty much shifted in different levels, I think. And for me, I carry this onkawara's experience for a long time, but I never had a chance to open up because it was kind of almost like a Pandora's box. I couldn't really open up. I, with my intuition, that's maybe when time comes, I have to think about this. But yeah, last years, I start feeling every moment that I don't know, I felt in my neighbors, I start feeling my new way of looking things through, for example, through a feeding crow. That I'm feeding crow now for over years, and then that everyday routine really give me a new way of engaging with animals I have not shared the language, or those things I have done over the years with COVID really open up my way of thinking of art. And then it's actually every time it reminds me of my conversations, what Onkawara say that Vancouver is a very 21st century. What does it mean? And so I thought maybe now is the chance to open up my Pandora box and share with friends I really care, or like I feel connected, to talk about these things. So I don't know. This is more or less my story. And those who doesn't know Onkawara, he's a Japanese, but he most of the time he live in New York, and he was born in 1932, and so he probably 89 if he's alive now, and he died in 2014. And so unfortunately I didn't have a chance to visit his studio after that, so everything is hold. And so now I start unpacking of this with you. And I thought maybe it's interesting that we can unpack this together, because I certainly sure that he was meant to be. That the reason he gave me this question was he's meant to be. And then for me, it's the way his art exists. It's beyond of object, but it's those kind of questions that he posing. And probably I think I'm gonna end my lecture or sharing, and maybe we can start conversation.
Yes, I see Faye. Thank you so much for sharing, Makiko. Okay, and I see Faye raising hand.
Hi.
Hello. Actually, I first heard of Onkawara as because I was a fellow at the Asian Cultural Council, and I was able to meet contemporary artists from Japan and China. So they were talking big about Onkawara when I met them. So that's when I first heard of him. But thank you so much for this opportunity to have a closer glimpse of Onkawara. He seemed so revered, at least among my ACC peers. But what I found really interesting from your lecture was he wasn't really interested in exhibition. He found it too archaic or old, and yet his date paintings seem to show that he was invested in the, or he was invested or very interested in the process of archiving, or at least of documenting and recording. But if he's doing that not for exhibiting it, then I wonder for what. Just thing that popped into my head. And then maybe the one he said about Vancouver being a trendy 21st century city compared to the other big cities. Maybe it's because I really found the fact that he mentioned his fishing right after saying that comment. I think it's he's referring to how people in Vancouver are just living their lives, their everyday lives, as people live their everyday lives, and not to perform, not as a spectacle, not to be exhibited as artworks.
Interesting point. What should we talk about? Which part?
Maybe the one the relationship between archiving and not exhibiting. What can you say about his relationship or his thoughts maybe on the process of archiving? Because from what I've read, I think he was really very meticulous in keeping records of the date paintings that he did, and he even had a journal where he recorded all of his date paintings, etc. And he was very meticulous, very like an archivist, really. So, but and yet he's not interested in exhibiting his artworks. So I really found that very interesting.
Any comment or whatever do you think? As I said, I'm not the specialist for the onkawara. Maybe it's a good time so we can, like a brainstorm. But my sense why he say I'm not interested in exhibition is, first, I'm not interested in to participate for your exhibition. It's a denial or like a rejection. And if I'm a museum curator or something, it's a big failure, like you can convince artists to be join it. But and of course I'm shocked. Okay, I'm rejected because I keep thinking, because my gallery is small, I can't pay him enough, or it's not prestigious. Of course, it's, all curators thinking that way. But he instead giving me this long conversation talk was giving me the way, particularly that work, I'm Still Alive, it's not meant to be exhibiting in the museum context to explain, or, this kind of conventional format. And I think the reason he sent me this Pure Conscious book after that was probably he challenging me that think about what is the better way of transcended or passing on this notion of his very nature of the concept. Is it exhibition or is it something else? So it's a challenge to me, that's, and then, if he said that, yes, Vancouver is 21st century city, why don't you try something else? I took it that way, and it was, of course, puzzling me. And so you're right. And then for sure, Onkawara is not necessarily interested in exhibition. For sure, he's interested in being part of the museum collection. It's part of the game. And then Onkawara probably never work beside of making a date paintings every day in his studio. That makes money for him. That's his economy too. Another reality. So, and then that's the material work is stay, but how his concept is stay with the artworks, or it's gonna grow, or it's gonna be reinterpreted, or it's gonna be transformed to something else. Probably he was interested in later on, maybe, or maybe from the beginning, he was interested in both about archiving material, preserving. That's one aspect of art as a part of the institution of making art, but something else beyond of that, and how we can deal with that, the part beyond of that. That's probably his question to me. And then that's probably a question that I want to share with you.
Thank you. Can I call Mark? I
Sure.
saw your hand up.
Okay. Thank you very much, Makiko, for your wonderful story about onkawara. And going back to the maybe question or point of onkawara not interested in exhibition and asking what is the 21st, what is art in the 21st century. So I think he don't want to define or what is art in the specific time, but it's like the endless or ongoing question about what is art, not really by the definition of time. I'm interested also how the dates are universal in context because everyone has, everyone knows about the date, but individually in different backgrounds or different places, we have different concept of that time. So this time also varies on our own definition of what is the time. So it's the same maybe as the question of what is art in our own context. So and I'm interested also in the idea of it's not exhibition but circulation, because he used a lot of zines, he used a lot of postcards, he used a lot of telegram, and I think this is the first gesture for him is not to exhibit but to maybe circulate in the form of post or sending or telephone call even. So, and the idea of circulation also is about air, the thing we breathe. So I think it's important on how we live also. So, so that's
Very
my
interesting.
thank you.
Thank you. So may I call everyone who is raising hand first, and then maybe we can bring out all these concepts together and discuss. Okay. So I would like to call Tanya or Olive.
Anya, sorry. I'm using Olive's account. I was really interested in how he approached you asking him about the exhibition because and insisting on not talking about it. I think it just goes to show that he's really pure with his intentions of making a life out of his practice rather than exhibiting his practice. Like I think for him to ask you about specifically about your locality, where you're from, and having a connection there, and kind of I think parang it's his. I say this because it's also how I deal with things. Like I want to connect with the people I'm working with, and more than just the materials or the material culture that we're working with. So because I also um got to know about him while I was sort of presenting a portfolio for an exhibition, for a gallery in New York, and the I was telling the artist, the curator, that um it's kind of weird that we're kind of doing that exchange, like it's not natural. I mean, I would have wanted to just talk to the curator about what's happening there, what's her life is like that. And but then we have to present a portfolio and stuff, and that's when she she mentioned Onkawara. And after that, I've always been thinking about Onkawara, in the sense that I was I was thinking, like, how was he able to be in a position where he can I mean, his economy of presenting works is by making paintings about days. Like, I can also do that, but I know that I wouldn't have an audience that can listen to me, or understand where I'm coming from. I don't have that position. That's why I like this question of, like, what is your product, or what is um the final form of your art practice, is always something that um I do think about. And I think that exchange between you and Kawara, and on that, like the date, or the schedule of your talks being specific, I think that is the performance of his practice. Like, he put you in a in an artwork. Your conversation was with him was the artwork. That's why there was a specific time and a specific way of talking to you. I think that was it. I think that's what I got from it. Yun lang.
Interesting. I feel like I'm a messenger.
Yeah,
Something.
yeah. Like, you,
An
it's
agent
not in
also.
a wall. It's you are the carrier of the life, or the event that he wanted to to share, and it was specifically for
But
you.
well, that's honor. If I well, I but don't you have any experience like those? Like if you are given to certain experience that you feel like you obligated to share with someone, like people, that experience or that thought, or
I
and no,
I think
go ahead.
the fact that you are making this talk, I mean, sharing the experience, and then interestingly, I was also thinking about him. Faye is also thinking about, also has an interaction, or an interest in Kawara, and it wasn't something that was it wasn't planned or anything. I think this is how you share it, or how you this is the work, like the continuation of it, or how it's being archived, how it's being
Mm,
shared. We are the specific audience for that work, like with the preschoolers. Like, he's trying to insert his work in like just mundane life. So
mhm.
he's like, this is it. Like, he just inserted himself into our lives right now in a
Yeah.
very natural way. And
Mhm.
I think that's nice, magical, and nice. Like, what I want to experience in art. Like, this parang it's not what the art, parang it's not a direction on how you accept art, or it's an experience, it's a personal thing. So I
Mm,
think this is a good example of it.
mhm.
And you'll only have a consciousness like that because you're talking to artists also. I mean, it would be a different engagement when he was putting his show for the preschoolers, and also the documentation of that is another art form. So like the unnatural um materiality of art, the way he's trying to insert it into real lives, I think that's the whole his whole purpose of. I think that's how he answers the question of what is 21st, or what is the art today, like what is the form. Because when I went to New York also, I felt that like this didn't feel new or modern, or it felt it's like an echo of another time when I was visiting galleries. Like it didn't feel alive for me. So yeah, I think the interactions where is and what you come up with, it that is also archive, that's also sharing and exhibiting, I think.
Mm,
That's it.
Thank you, Tanya.
thank you,
Um,
Tanya. And it's funny that Mark said that he's still alive in spirit, and it's probably it is. And I give you a little bit episode. That onkawara was very famous that he never show up at his opening. So his existence is very in questions. That of course he's friend with all those curators and artists of his contemporary New York. Everybody knows Onkawara. Everybody say he's a heavy smoker. He loved chess and he loved fish, like fishing and all those things. So of course he's exist. And then in Wikipedia, he was born. It said that born in a career in Aichi, which probably leads to the next questions or next comment by Hiro. He's a Japanese, and then died in 1947 in July, 2014 in July. So he was probably exist as a human, but there's no much trace. And so when it was about the time that I was walking like crazy at Koganecho with Yuzus in 2014 with Yamano-san and everybody was there, I got this news that Onkawara died. And then at first like, oh shit, I missed the chance to visit his New York studio to continue this conversation, because I start feeling after that year was a very shifting time for me, as I said in the beginning. After I left Vancouver and then start traveling to Southeast Asia, meeting with a new young artist, and it's going to those countries that's completely different system, and start thinking of his question, and then got the news that he died. So I feel kind of disappointed, but in the same time, I don't know, like, is he really died? Or like, and then some people, when that news circulated in social media, some people said that, he doesn't exist. Or, like, Onkawara himself is a concept. Or, those kind of strange rumors come up. And it's interesting that how he framed of himself in that kind of huge questions about artist in presence or artist existence, also a concept. And that's extreme, of course, but to think about along with his artworks, it's very interesting, right? Like, he's always conscious about his existence, presence, all those things. And then when he died, what's going to happen? It's probably there's a last date painting of the day that before he going to the hospital or whatever. Is it end, or is that concept of date paintings, it's infinity? I don't know. That's, but it's very interesting things to think about.
Zeus?
I really like how you. I mean, thanks for the story. I really enjoyed the PDF that you shared about pure conscious. I think parang it's like Tanya said, it's how it's a way of infusing your an art practice into like the everyday, the simplest things. And I think on Kawamura, based on his titles, pure consciousness, parang he has this kind of awareness of where he is as a human being, and also his position in art by deciding not to exhibit. But I really I will echo Tanya's what she told earlier na it's one of my concerns as an exhibiting artist. Parang I also don't have that kind of position na para to just say no to these opportunities. He must have been really he has this stability na he had with his career. But also I was thinking I admire him for because when it was mentioned earlier na um, when you the first question was kumbaga how he still producing paintings, creating paintings, and at the same time not really wanting to participate in a public platform, which is an exhibition specifically. You mentioned Makiko na parang maybe it's his way of playing the game, and I get that. I get from it na there's a sense of exclusivity that he's applying to his strategies. Like for example, the exhibition in the preschool, it has these specific instructions to the teachers to not really alienate, but to limit the access to and I think in those certain parameters, the experience of the intervention of art in the everyday parang is heightened, and also the wanting to know more about the works and the artist's intentions are parang all part of like strategies. But also, I mean, it's just part of I'm thinking it's just part of like how he wants to participate in this whole contemporary art world, coming from reading his biography, a glimpse of his biography from the shared documents na coming from a culture that is from Japan and then experiencing Mexico and New York and Paris. But I think that those kind of influence on how he wants to participate in this art, contemporary art world, and it's just so. I kind of it's just so nice to thinking of what is art in the 21st century. Parang it's well, yeah, I will repeat na exclusivity is one. Siguro I am saying in this example that exclusivity is one thing. It doesn't really mean um, being selfish, or it's just uh, um, kumbaga, a means to heighten the experience of art making, or being present with artworks. And I think it's just thinking of the local context here in the Philippines. It's kind of hard to uh, make an economy from that kind of presentations. Just this is because based on my experience, but I kind of like applied that kind of process of art making here. Now there's this I did a photograph documentation of an exercise. Um, Now thinking about it, parang it's more of like I remember Michael's work in Koganecho where there were questions and prompts to the drummer, and then the drummer reacts to her um, own beating of her drum set. and it kind of plays into documentation and film also. So parang although it was shared, all of it was shared parang for other people to experience what happened in the whole documentation. But I was here in La Union, one of the products I kind of like just thinking of the word exclusivity also, parang just one a photographic representation of the exercise is presented in an exhibition, but the whole process of it, like sharing of the words with the model or with the subject, it was kind of like kept from the public. So, I mean, those are just my thoughts.
Thank you, Zeus. Okay, just hearing what you guys mentioned, it struck me how we talked about materiality, circulation, and lastly, Zeus mentioned about exclusivity. And I'm curious to hear from Makiko and also maybe others as well. But why did Onkawara choose preschool as a site for showing his work, the pure conscious? Why not in other grade in school or in, let's say, nursing home? I wonder why he chose this particular age group. Any thoughts?
5 to 6. What do you remember what you see or you experience at the age of 5 to 6?
I kind of do.
What is your memory you have? Do you remember anything?
I remember playing a lot.
Okay. It's I don't know that I think partly my interpretation is 5 to 6 is, I don't know, I'm not a psychologist or anything or child psychologist, but it's probably the whole world you learn from visual or from listening or from animation or book or whatever come to your mind and structures of a meaning. What is this, right? But without too much of pre-information, specifically a language, probably. So he probably was curious about that pure experience of being with an art without acknowledge or noticing this is an art, how that's be part of your experience when you grow up. And I'm not sure, but that's probably linked to his anecdote about the Altamia's cave paintings, all those things. And then I forgot to tell you that when we're talking about his discovery, he said, it's my discovery in a way that when I was struggling as an artist in a young time, when you were young, he traveled Europe and he happened to visit of the cave. And then he see the drawing and it was something he understands suddenly something. And he said, what kind of language should I explain? It's in Japanese, it's called keiji o uketa. It's in a direct translation means he got enlightenment or epitome. Is that right?
Let me check.
Randy, is that right? Epitome. You know, that's in a very Christian sense, or awaken. You got the God send you something, and then it's like suddenly you understand the world. You know, that moment, eureka, or almost transcendence. But we discuss how about this, English translation. But he said, no, it's nothing religious beyond of that. But it's something that you suddenly, with your all lived experience, knowledge, or something, but you encounter something and understand the things that's beyond language. I don't know, but I think he tried to say something about this, and then pretty much that his a concept of holding this pure conscious project specifically for that structures in the kindergarten and no explanation, that kind of things, might be a kind of experiment of that. And it seems so far that there's no descriptions about now it's 10 years or 20, almost 20 years later. So those kids probably are like 25 or something, but there's no research of, how they experience or anything. Probably not necessary. That's, I don't know. It's interesting that it's kind of the same as his question to me, that just give it to you as a very low form of question or concept. And then it's evolved by itself, carried by individual. And then now I share with you so that you have to carry my question with me. But it's interesting that how he is very conscious about that, I guess.
Yeah, it's
No?
amazing to hear. Like when actually the first time I heard Makiko share this story was in Japanese. And she was, Hattori-san just left, but so Makiko was giving a talk in Akita University of Art, and it was in Japanese. And it was not the talk by Makiko, but she was just one of the panelists and decided to share a bit of this story. But the question from Onkawara was very clear. What is art in the 21st century? And when I heard Makiko talking about it, I felt like I really need to share this with the friends in the Philippines. And I thought, the learners who I have in this course really need to also think about this question. And I constantly bring this up to, of course, Mark, because we, are talking. But so I think this impulse to share, with this question is quite strong. And yeah, and also I keep imagining why it's in a kindergarten. This work was exhibited, and it's called pure conscious. And the notion of pure is a little bit also scary these days, no? But yeah, so it keeps coming back, and what is his stance about this title also? Yeah, and sometimes, like the decoration of the walls in kindergarten, it's of course for the kids, but also for the parents, who go there. And it's an exclusive space for kids as well as for parents. So I wonder if there is, this kind of sub-message that he's trying to send to parents. Instead of like encountering a calendar, they will see these random dates.
Yeah.
Anyone would like to add?
I'd like to say something.
Tanya.
You were talking about epiphany, and I think this I think I can relate to that in terms of creative consciousness. Everybody has it. I think when you connect to a work or a drawing or a cave painting, you connect to the creativity, and then you understand it without explanation because we all have creative consciousness. And so sometimes when I also got it was a highlight for me when I was reading about my dad's work. He's a writer, and he also, as an introduction to his some of his writings, he would talk about where his creative consciousness came from, seeing that he comes from a poor family. He was not exposed to poetry or to theater, or ano, but he knows in himself that he has creative consciousness because he started writing. He started, being interested with the different art forms. So I think this creative consciousness, how we carry it and make it more clear for ourselves and for other people, is the artwork. I was just um I was I'm read I just I am reading this text by sino ba yun? In Search of Our Mother's Garden. It's by Alice Walker, and it talks about like before, when our mothers didn't have any access to expressing their art, their creative minds, expressing them their the beauty or whatever, their creative when there was no the slaves, when at that time, she was talking about how they didn't have any um practical means of expressing themselves. They still found a way to do it through making quilts, through their hairstyles, through all of these things that are connected to their everyday lives, things that they use. And she was saying that we have to search for our mother's gardens, all of our mother's gardens. Like in the past, they didn't have these tools to express themselves. um so we all are connected to that, and we all are we all get inspiration from that. Or it's a continuation, continuous conversation of having to be able to express our creative consciousness. So I don't know, that's I don't know my point, but I think it's connected to that. Like uh I'm just thinking, like, there are times whenever I cannot express my creative self, I feel like I'm going insane. Like there's something missing, or like it's not. So I think, and also Alice Walker also mentioned that imagine our grandmothers not having a room to express themselves. That could really make a person crazy, and I really um I relate to that. And I think Ankawara's way of Ankawara's work is a is a neat, or a more is a clearer presentation of what a cave painting is, or what a quilt for a grandmother is. Like it's a clearer way of expressing that creative consciousness is here, and it's we all have it, or he has it, like that, I think.
Okay, Tanya, thank you.
Anyone?
Yeah, we have several questions. Can I call Jed?
Yep.
Yeah, I have a question for Makiko. I mean, thank you so much for this story. I think I'll try to go about it in a roundabout way, but I think there's a question in there somewhere. I think at the center of my question is about, for lack of a better term, let's call it national identity or identity derived from where we came from. And, because I think throughout this conversation, I'm very hesitant, honestly, to kind of like make conclusions about Onkawara's intentions about anything. I mean, ultimately, we know nothing. But also, I'd like to speculate maybe about his frame of mind, especially Makiko, when you talked about him knowing, the art world, this is a game, etc. Um, Also, when you mention kind of like this specific Japanese word that we can loosely translate to maybe epiphany, but also I know that at the same time, there must necessarily be uh, entirely different Japanese context to it. I think so. I think my question about national identity is if you have speculations about to what extent Onkawara actually was self-conscious of this. I think I ask this from the perspective of working in the Philippines, where among contemporary artists, we're always dealing with this history of colonization, and the contemporary art practice is a decolonizing project. And what does it even mean? And I think we all can personally say that there does come a point when it does present to be a burden. Almost like when you're asked where you're from, you become a symbolic figure of your entire history and your entire culture. And I also relate to kind of like what Kawara said about Duchamp, right? There is the sense where Duchamp is kind of like this overarching, oppressive, looming figure that whatever you do is a variation on Duchamp. And I think sometimes this extends. It's almost like in this culture of being asked who you are or where you come from, apart from being inside life, you have to take a stance of being bird's eye view and kind of like make a historical conclusion about where you are. I mean, I've heard Mark talk about this, for example, the importance of situating yourself where what spot you fill in kind of like the ongoing waves of the art historical movement. I think I'm curious to know, Makiko, what's your impression on how Onkawara maybe thought of this? Not just your impression from your conversation, but your impression about, the his fame and his body of work, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very interesting question. There's a lot of layer in your interpretations and questions. I'm happy to hear that because maybe this, little anecdote that I share with you is kind of trigger of all those different way of thinking. And definitely, like it's the most challenging for me is talking about this in English because the conversation was in Japanese and it's contained a kind of unspoken uh, culture things that we share, not in the Japanese language itself, but the using Japanese language in the context of talking about contemporary art, which is a Western concept, that kind of gap. And then also that's why that's the translations of his senses of awakens or epidemic is very almost impossible to translate into English. And also that though he didn't mention anything, I imagine of his the concept of the presence or alive, very much related to his war experience during the Second World War. More so, I start thinking this with learning of his contemporary generation who is start dying, and including my own mentor, and many artists about that his generation, especially the Japanese artists who left their country for some reasons, and it's because myself left my own country for some reasons. I start thinking of why he located himself outside of Japan and in New York for such a long time, but he's still kind of super critical about New York. And he's talking about like a Spanish oldest cave, that's in his mind of being free from where he come from and where he is. It's associate for me, start associate with his non-free experience during the war, and then also a search of something else that's a resist to that extreme power that Japan at the time of, I think I calculated today, it was probably he experienced the war between the 10 to 13, the war's time, 1942 to 1945. 10 to 13 is a very conscious time, remember, like of your time, like end of junior high, like, junior high school time. You're very reading things, you start questioning about things, questioning to authority, all those things is, he went through the war, right? And so it's interesting that for me, that most of that generation, artist or art critic or whoever, doesn't mention about their war experience. And it's us to start questioning and start searching, researching to what was about, because it's almost disappeared, because those who lived experience of that time, it's dying. And so it's interesting how we contextualize of someone's experience that with the kind of knowledge and imaginations of why he, and first of all, start of that format of contemporary art or conceptual art. Where is the motivation come from, and what he was seeking for, and who he tried to say or pass on to these questions. And probably that, Jed, you as born and grow up in Philippines, and in the context might have a very different way to frame your artworks. It's, that's Onkawara's developed in very of his own way. And probably we each doing this, that we each kind of structuring our own identity, but it's kind of interesting that he, at the very beginning of conversation, he's kind of putting this critical context about Mao Zedong's is haunted of the concept of art, and therefore New York is a old school in a way. It's not saying New York is finished, no, but it's more haunted place of the very concept of contemporary art, or art was, but it art was, and not art will be. And so it's in place for the 21st century art. I don't think so. Here is the same, that we're occupied by very institutional concept of art, the art practice is very determined by the system. But our notion or our environment might help us to move on to some paradigm shift.
I agree.
Thank you.
I don't
Mars,
know.
would you like to share your comments?
I was just kind of finding parallels with the work of Onkawara's exhibition with the children, because he did mention in the phone call that you made that um, there's this kind of a bit of joy in sea fishing.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a mundane thing to say, and at the same time, having to display your art where children who might not even be able to fully appreciate the work, there's kind of a similar feeling, I feel. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. It too. Sea fishing has a different episode, which I want to tell shortly. It's after these conversations, I really kind of gave up the exhibition, but I keep thinking how I can respond to Onkawara after this, after receiving this book and whatever. I remember that I thought Onkawara said, I love to come back to Vancouver, in the conversation. So I thought I should invite Onkawara anyway to Vancouver. I had to make excuse. And then what triggered me is like, he said, oh, Jeff Wall invited me last time. Jeff Wall is a famous conceptual photographer, not his age, but maybe not 70 now. And then she said, like, I went to the sea fishing with him. So I thought, and 2 years later, I have opportunity to work with an artist, Korean Canadian artist Kan Lee, who is the head assistant of Jeff Wall. And because he had a huge studio with a huge, staff. And Kan's invited Jeff to contribute essays on his catalog. So I have a chance to work with Jeff Wall. So I asked Jeff Wall when he came to the office, said, Jeff, I have this conversation actually with your friend Onkawara. And I have these crazy ideas, but I need your help. I want you to invite him again to Vancouver and then go to sea fishing. And that's it. You can just pray, but with your own expenses, because you're a rich artist, you're a very successful rich artist. I don't want to pay for this, but I want to have just one line, say, Center A having this exhibition that Jeff Wall invite Onkawara and went to sea fishing from this day and to this day. I thought that could be fun. And then Jeff Wall actually, I love the ideas. Like, I don't mind to invite Onkawara. I love to spend his time with him. Only problem, Makiko, is last time I went to the sea fishing with Onkawara, I got seasick and then throw it all the time. And then since then, I decided not doing the sea fishing. So I failed again. But I still wanted to do that project regardless of that Jeff will invite him or not, because I could make it up. But I actually didn't do it, but I thought that could be fun.
Great anecdote. Thank you. Can I call Alain?
Hi, thank you, Mayumi. Hi, Makiko. Thank you for that insightful lecture and yeah, I think my question is, I'm very curious about how you answered your definition of 21st century art, and I'd like to ask, how does it inform your practice as a curator, both as independent and someone who used to work for institutions or with institutions? Because Mayumi knows I try to be keen on, let's say, I'm very curious about knowledge production and circulation in terms of, let's say, curatorial practice and art management. So I'm curious how you answered your definition of 21st century, and how does this affect your practice? Thank you.
That's a huge question. You know that you know,
sorry,
and
sorry.
the reasons I ask Mayumi, I want to share this story, is that because I can't answer this. You know, that I wanted to think with you guys, and I think it's my. So I didn't answer to him anything. You know, like I can't really do that. But I think that question was not expected to be answered. And that, of course, affect your practice. So I'm warning you, that's going to affect you from today to your practice. You know, definitely that's the concept. It's kind of open up some part of your brain, and you don't need to be very critical, or, you know, that's not following his path at all, but it's you, same as my last 14 years, you carry on this concept, I guess. And my recent essays on my kitchen museum, that's I probably some of you read, or like Mayumi shared, and that's really a kind of ended up like a long essays, and I wrote my kind of shift of my conscious, or like a notion or lifestyle during the COVID, and the way in this circumstance and conditions, that's what I did, and that's probably contains some kind of answers that you say how it affects to me on my practice. And that doesn't mean that I won't make exhibition, but it's become more critically think how exhibition makings mean. Does that
Right, right. I
answer?
think, yeah, right, right. Thank you. I think it's also nice to reflect on, for example, if we start defining what 21st century art is, we there might be limits for us in our practice, no, that whatever we do, we just say what we believe on, for example, what 21st century art is. But yeah, it's very refreshing, yeah, to hear from you. Thank you, Makiko.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Aling and Makiko.
Thank you, Makiko, for the great story. And my Wi-Fi situation is a bit slow, so sorry if my conversation is delayed. And my interpretation of your story about Onkawara, I felt that his work deals with period of time and period of human life long, and the thing that he talked with you about the question about the 21st century woodworker experience is related to the time of human life. And I felt that it was like a time capsule, that the thing that actually people cannot recognize at that moment, but when time passes, they would know what was it, or they would understand what was contained in it. And why he showed his works at kindergartens, I thought that he wanted to pass something to the next generation. And I was curious that he uses very dry, how to say, like he uses date or time, very objective things, but this, I felt this is more like mouth-to-mouth history, or how to say, more subjective information than that. Yeah, that's my interpretation. No conclusion, but I was interested in that he uses different kind of time, also different kind of information to think about our recognition of world, that we are in the long history, long time, but at the same time we can live only in our lives, so we have limited time, but we are also we are included in a longer time as well, right? I feel that. And my question is, you say that he shows the date paintings from January 1st to January 7th in 2097. And
1997.
1997. And do you think he showed these continuous specific date for all kindergartens, or only for that specific kindergarten? Because I'm curious why.
I'm curious why too. And but in it seems by the document, it's always that 7 painting. It's the 7 painting was traveling for specific for this project. So it never been, it's always that 7 same painting. I don't know why. And he didn't left any clue of the selection of that painting. Maybe it's just the first project started from that around that time and then decided to that way. I don't know. It's a mystery. His work is always mystery. Yeah.
Thank you. But yeah, sorry, one last question. One last feedback. Because you said the age between 5 to 6 years old, right? And that specific kindergarten show happened in 2006. So it was before they born. The date was before they born, right? So yeah, I was wondering how it relate to no conclusion, but
yeah. No, it's an interesting kind of question to think about. Like, I think it's also interesting that he mentioned about this, that he did one in Toronto, but he wasn't very happy about the text. And he said, and I think it's for Some curators I know who did this project was Yuko Hasegawa and Hohanru, but I never asked them how was their experience working with on this project. I love to do that next time. But both Hohanru and Yuko writing to contextualize about this project in the book, in the brochure. I didn't share with you, but because On said he didn't want it. He didn't want it to have any curator contextualize of this project. Instead, he wanted to have someone understand the very nature of his intention and then choose a text instead. And then he said, I particularly like the one that's made in a very tiny kindergarten in Shikoku, somewhere, Takamatsu, somewhere. That's the coordinator, he didn't say curator, but coordinator of the project. I share that the text with you. Choose the perfect one. The ones that about canoeing, river, and uncle. So it's interesting. It's like he's probably, this was started in responding to some kind of curators or exhibition or triennales requests to him, possibly. You know, that's some curators curating of Istanbul Biennale, for example, and then ask Onkawara to respond something. And then he proposed this idea, and then probably he likes these ideas, and then he makes it traveling or something like that. So it wasn't like his intention to develop onto 13 different sites, but probably, you know, around that time in 2017 to 1997 to 2006, he continuously doing this project as some part of the event or something. And but he's every time this very basic rules of in kindergarten nobody access, and then just no explanations of this same painting, and then the brochure at the end of the project with a photo and one text. I think he challenging to the every curators how they respond to this. And some text is, mostly the text is on their own language, so I can't really read. It's Dutch or, you know, Côte d'Azur, it's the French, and, you know, many Finnish, Chinese. But some of them, yeah, I mean, this one's, for example, like Pure Conscious in Shanghai. It's curated by Ho Han Liu as a part of Shanghai Biennale. But in the Biennale, it was only introduced that this is part of the program, but no one can access to see it, right? And then some text was completely I cannot read, or it's not even language, like this. You know, this is some, what is this called? Like that. A mathematic chart or something. And even probably Onkawara could read this text. So I don't know, it's interesting that this is a variety of certain different curators' response of one kind of format of assignment that he gave into, or like he responded to each curator, I think. But I wasn't interested in to do it's another Pure Conscious. I thought even though I was gifted, I think my response to him wasn't the similar to or doing the same things. I don't know why I thought in that way.
So do you think doing this kind of talk in a way is a response to the message of Onkawara, Makiko?
I think it's too late because he's dead. But what I can do then? Somehow I wanted to release of this, or I wanted to share. And this is not necessary. I'm not very sentimental for this, actually. More, but not pragmatic either. But I thought after this 1 year with COVID, I thought maybe now is the time. I don't know. But don't you feel like this? To thinking of his art make really kind of resonance of what we're experiencing now. In many ways, I'm not making art, but it's making art or presenting art or communicating and all those things more so than before. And that's, I don't know, it's interesting that Onkawara's work itself, if you see in the book or catalog or online, whatever, you already see a certain very particular format, date painting or postcard, whatever. You think that you see it, but I don't know, that's probably if you go to Toyota Museum, they have the best collection of onkawara. You can see the many date painting, or in Germany, or like in many places, that's most of the museum has huge date paintings in the collection, and you can see it. But how you see the work behind of that existing painting itself, how you see Onkawara's work now, it's interesting. I don't know how to explain this.
Yeah, to be honest, every time I encountered Onkawara's work, I felt it was very cold. I know the concept and it's quite touching, right? It's about life and death. But the surface is very cold, even though we know that it's hand painted and he will destroy at the end of the day. But just I think hearing Makiko's story embodies the work so much and enlivens it. And I wonder if it was also Onkawara's intention to share this, bits of his life stories and bring out more questions than trying to define who he was or what he did. Yeah. So
yeah, and then by the way, I think Onkawara is famous to have this long telephone conversation with many artists. So I'm not the only one. I'm pretty sure Ogura-san, Masashi told me that he introduced to Tatsuo Miyajima and Rei Naito, or like many people who went, and Hiroshi Sugimoto, all those artists spending some time in New York might listening more like a daily basis about those stories from Onkawara. So I probably, I'm lucky one, but I'm not the only one. But I wanted to share because it's a kind of nice experience, and then it's kind of nice to share at this very challenging time. So.
Definitely. I think we are the lucky ones.
Well,
being shared with this story. can I hear from Denver? We have psychology background in the room.
You're the psychologist?
Yeah.
Wow. I want to hear.
No, not really. I mean, I used to work as a mental health worker before I decided to become an artist. So it's really interesting how um about on Kawara's experience of seeing the cave paintings, and then somehow later on in his career he decided to show his works on children, particularly kindergarten. I share this thought. This is in the chat box, where there is this theory based on Eric Erickson's psychosocial theory, where he mentioned specifically about the how this is just his theory about different age groups or different phases in our lives, and specifically that kindergarten um, time period. It really specifies the idea of autonomy or independence, establishing that in our own, in these children's own little worlds. And it's interesting that Onkawara exposed his work in that specific age group, because after the next age group, which is around 9 to 10 or 9 to 12 years old, these are children who are now exposed to a much more complex social structure, where they are taught more complex language or culture or science. But in this kindergarten stage, there is still a lot of play going on. And so it's interesting how, and also mentioning how his works, Mayumi mentioned, and he also mentioned about how cold it looks, um, how there's some sort of, I even see that type of work as exercising his level of control of how he wants to be perceived. But then again, the way you talk about your experience with him, conversing with him, it's so opposite, like how lively he is, how extremely passionate he is in as an artist, and how he perceives probably the future of art, or anyhow. So it's quite interesting how that clashes a lot in terms of his practice, and particularly that sort of, I guess, level of question in terms of particularly doing that piece with the kindergarten students. I'm actually curious how the children reacted, which is sadly no one really, I guess, knew much about it.
Or
But
maybe
that's
the kindergarten teachers can reveal interview. It's 20 years ago, so but yeah, I'm curious.
Because more of that, I guess, and how it really goes, how distant it is in terms of the overall um exercise, or the level of how the art world is in terms of its practice, and somewhat how it's real, how he made that sort of work very distant in a way, like like it's very difficult to decipher, but it's also very, I guess, there's a lot of play in terms of how it would be interpreted later on. Sort of he gives that also freedom. But yeah, it's really mind-boggling.
I know this mind-boggling is certainly a strategy, I think, by Onkawara, because imagine that was organized as a part of the Biennale. You go, like Shanghai or Istanbul, and then you see the list of the name Onkawara, say, oh my God, Onkawara is in Shanghai Biennale, I should go to see his work. But you're not allowed to see the work. And then you're giving that information that his painting is in the kindergarten and no one allowed to do that in this month during the exhibition, the Triennale or Biennale. That's really bothering, like, it's really bothering. What? Like, is it almost like like a refusal
Yes,
of
and
the
also
art audience, no? Like,
yes, and knowing
I
that
don't want to show you. It's, you know, that's no.
and knowing that he is at that time he's a big artist, but at the same time he exposed his works to children who doesn't really know anything about, who's just starting their lives. That opposition, or probably something that has a very interesting dynamic, as a reflection, I think, of how, I guess, how he really perceives not just his art practice, but probably bigger than that, probably about life, really, how he sees his life as an artist, I think. That's just my reaction.
No, it's interesting that you had experience of the you know, like a child psychology and all those things from that kind of perspective too.
Yeah.
I'm curious to ask Nozomu, as a curator, how do you think about this as the artist's resistance of being curated, and then that kind of propose in that kind of form of not showing art in what we kind of conventionally do?
Yeah.
It's very challenging, isn't it?
Yeah, actually. But maybe, but yeah, recently I talked with artists who work in Tokyo, like some artists, and they are not like young artists, like how do you say, not established, but same age with me, and they recently they are not so interesting in like show making the exhibition, like a typical exhibition, like they're more interested in their life, like for example, like making gyoza dumpling or something like that. And but I think how can I say, of course it's not only life, like every time artists think about what is art, not only life. So but for example, recently, like how do you say, like for example, when I visited Vancouver, there's so many artists who don't make the typical artwork. They make the more relational something, right? But I think that Kawara's idea doesn't similar with such kind of the relational work. So how can I say, like not typical like object work as well, but not only life.
I know.
So
I know. There's so many layers.
Yeah. So,
and then that's why he's probably considered as a king of conceptual art, because it's hard to just contextualize of his concept.
Yes, maybe of course we cannot find the like typical answer, but maybe there's something between life and art, and between I don't know, conceptual and object. Sorry, I don't say that.
Yeah. No, nobody has an answer, so it's good to brainstorm and
yeah. But I'm curious about this pandemic period. Maybe maybe connect to his thinking. Like you think so, right? So
that's why I decided to share. It's a time because somehow in many different levels I see the paradigm shift in my friends' conscious. Not everyone, and I don't think everyone's do it. But some people start how to say engage in art in a very different way, and that's for me. It's very optimistic and a very positive change. And so, yeah, and I'm really tempted to hear any feedback from Yamano-san and Randy, the seniors. As more life.
Makiko,
Yeah.
before we go to these seniors, can I call a student?
Okay.
Of mine
Who's left?
Questions
Who haven't talked?
James.
Hi, Makiko.
Hi.
Thanks for the insightful talk. I would like to bring this up in relation to what you said about art transcending language, and maybe somehow related to resistance, which I think is also the same case with language transcending art. I actually read this anecdote in your speech. You started your speech problematizing art within the linguistic formation of the word bijutu, if I pronounce it right, or art in Japanese language. That there seems to be a mistranslation, or the word art doesn't capture the essence of Japanese art. I am noting this to establish this common ground, maybe, between Japan and the Philippines, and perhaps other Asian countries, because I think Filipino art critics and art historians have also problematized this, that there's no actually direct translation of art in the Filipino language. Sining, S-I-N-I-N-G, which is the Filipino term for art, originally meant imagine. So I think this concerns about the Western influence and canon of art. And I agree with you. It has a lot to do with the fact that we have our own existing notion of art already. Somehow I see this particular anecdote also as a form of resistance. My question would be, how is it important to create a discourse in art through resistance, or is resistance necessary at all? Something that the art speak advocated as well. That's it. Thank you.
That's really big question, isn't it? Of course, that's really a big question that we all have to be very aware and then been thinking at the language or like the concept of art, and it was kind of given or imported to most of the non-Western culture, and from where we start consider some creation or something, some gestures defined as an art. And now it's become more universal. So it's everybody's not questioning about using terms art, but it to look back the roots of itself, it's very different from every culture. But actually we kind of cut it off from the roots as well. We share this modern culture and modern global life. So it's very I can't answer simply, and but it's the same time there's a new notions among this power shift, global power shift, and especially so with those indigenous cultures on the process of decolonization and all those things. I hate those language, by the way, but this is happening. How to bring back their each traditions and cultures roots of creating something, not necessarily call it art, but and not necessarily defined in a Western language. How we can define those things is a big question now, and interesting questions. And it's that's all things. It's, I don't want to simplify, but all things that are structures of our concept of art is called institution, I think. Everything. That's museum, educations, you know, all those things, market, whatever. It's a system we develop to support all of this around art. But we are also being in this cage of concept of art because of this institution we built. And that's probably parallel to the problem, more like a fundamental problem we're facing with the COVID-19. That's the whole system, and probably particularly most biggest and powerful, like a nation, it's doesn't functions, and it's reveal its kind of contradictions in many places. How the human's life being threatened, you know, all those things. That it's all system that we humans try to develop to make that kind of society, or some, you know, that's protection of a creation, or it called art or whatever, is in the question. So that's why it's interesting. We think this question of Ankawaras is just as a kind of opening up things. It's not necessary even talking about art, but because this group we're talking is involved in art, so that's why I'm talking about this. But you know, could be politics, could be, you know, could be different things, but it's I feel like it's we're in a very huge moment that have to think in differently and have to act differently, but it's not easy that way. And I think it's, and that's the whole this things happening right now is too big that each of us feeling kind of powerless to be part of the change. But the to thinking about this, what's art in the 21st century, and then to think and then to do some practice through these questions might have some a kind of hint or clue of how to say of adapting or shifting ourselves, our conscious into that new things. I don't know. Maybe I'm trying to talk something philosophical but doesn't have a language.
Thank you, Makiko. I think Yamano-san needs to leave soon, and I wonder if he could share some words. Yamano-san, 何か一言いただけますか？
翻訳しますよ。
タイプされてる。もしよかったら山野さんお話しいただけたら。I think he's resisting to our request.
Okay.
Okay, here.
Doesn't matter.
ごめんね。あんまり理解してなかった。
いいです。
飛び飛びで。
はい。
分かってないんで。今度ゆっくりまた日本語で教えてください。
ゆっくりまた
自分のために。
はい。
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 ということで、でもなんか知らない方が知ってる人もいっぱいいたけど、知らない人もたくさんいて、非常になるほど、こうやって今つながってるんだなっていうのが分かって楽しかったです。ありがとう。
山野さん、何か若いちょうどみんな30代のアーティストとかキュレーターなんですけれども、フィリピンの何かメッセージあれば。
いや楽しみだなと思いまして、若い人たちが次から次にいろんな国から参加されてますよね、きっとね、今日ね。それでぜひ来ていただける状況になったらね、ぜひ小金町にトライしていただきたいなと思ってもお待ちしてます。ぜひ皆さんとお会いしたいな。そろそろ行きたいよ、私も。はい、ごめんけど、皆さんにそういうことを言ってるって伝えてください。
はい、ありがとうございます。ありがとうございます。
はい。
Okay, so he has to leave, but before he leave, I asked if he has some words to share with us, and he said, just come visit Koganecho when the time allows, and we have many opportunities, and I see lots of potentials in these young curators and artists. So let's stay in touch, and I would love to be able to visit Philippines soon after the COVID ends. Okay. ありがとうございます。
Thank you, 山野さん。
どうもありがとう。
ありがとうございます。
私は退出します。はい。
I've been thinking of the last questions about language and discourse of art, which I think we all, I don't know everyone, but I kind of myself feeling that the language so limiting of our ideas of art, more so these days. And because it's not just institutionalized, but it's so academicized. And somehow that this Onkawara's Pure Conscious project, or, that is also addressing of that. And especially that he asked how to contextualize of this by each curators. And he was very critical about using the art language to contextualize this, which was very interesting for me. So in that sense also, I'm puzzling, and I couldn't really answer to him for this big question.
Is there anyone else who would like to share? Mr. Randy. Yes.
Mr. Randy. Hi.
Interesting conversation, and I think it's really exciting that young artists are so concerned with meaning. The question of 21st century art, I think maybe Yamano best answered that when he said, "Come and visit me." I really think that's 21st century art, whether it's physical, virtual, whatever. But to share things is the new relationalism. I was a student during the first wave of conceptual art. And it really screwed us up.
Yeah.
I've never recovered.
Mm.
But I think that Onkawara is following a tradition more than being a groundbreaker.
Mm.
And don't forget that he did a date painting every day. And they have value in the art market. So he always had that in his mind. So whether, David Medela or Jean Dupuis, who just passed away, Esther Ferre, I think that what's at the essence of these things, or Baldessari, is it's all about poetry. It's creating a poetry without words that has the same, it hangs in you like some kind of a fragment that you can't resolve, but you keep rolling it around. And I think maybe that's the core. A few people are doing things in response to the COVID lockdown. Champon Apasak in Nan, Thailand, he has an artist residence, and his response is he's personally built a giant amphitheater in a ravine that holds 130 people for when things get back to normal. I find this kind of gesture really positive. So I don't know how to address Kawara. Yes, he's one of the great minds. I really think it's similar to David Medela. This same generation, same kind of concept of relational aesthetic and societal confrontation, kind of. That's all.
Thanks.
Thank you, Randy. Dan, can I call you?
Hi. I understand it's quite late where you are right now, Makiko. So I'm just going to be very quick with my question. So first of all, thank you, Makiko and our guests for the interesting and informative discussion. Thank you for affirming the difficulty of defining art in the 21st century. This was a question Mayumi posed to our class, and I think we're also struggling to come up with something. I understand our class will have an activity later on, which will relate to your practice in the My Kitchen Anthropological Museum. So this might be a shallow question, and I'm sorry if I missed it from one of the readings, but I'm just curious if Onkawara has been represented in any of your quote-unquote exhibitions in this institution. And so does he have a place in there, or how was he presented?
What do you mean? That's if I invite Kawara or in my museum?
No, because you have, I understand it's the collection there is comprised by the things you've collected over the years, right?
Yeah.
So is it are the objects he sent you part of the collection? Did you present this in the institution?
I've never done that. Do you want to curate this?
I'm just curious to know if it's something that you like thought of.
Yeah, I'm showing a more for now. No, I haven't really think about Onkawara in my next museum show. And I never think of that, but now I think of that because of you mentioned that, and I'm not sure.
But Makiko, his booklets are fundamental to it.
Yeah, it's true. It's his handwriting, you know. It's such an honor to have this, and but I don't know. Also, I noticed that, as Randy said, that we tend to seeking of some sort of answers, meaning for everything, and it's probably that's a kind of how our mind work around art. We always try to find the meaning, and my museum is how to try to not destroy is a too big word, but it's kind of interrupt of that kind of association with a place like museum. That's why I put it in the kitchen. You understand?
Yeah. So
It's,
maybe my question was, does onkawara have a place in your museum?
yeah, I don't want to put onkawara in my kitchen for now.
All right, thank you so much.
Okay, any other questions or feedback? No. Okay. So I think it's time for us to conclude. And usually I try to summarize, but today I think I'm not gonna try that because the whole purpose of having this is to just keep us puzzled and questioned. So I feel like if I try to summarize, it will beat our purpose of having this conversation. So I think what we should do is individually to just list up all these questions that we came across today and just carry it with us. Yeah, so
Okay,
that's the next step.
And then thank you for sharing your thoughts and on this these opportunities. It's really expanding my way of thinking of this question, and it's so grateful to share this time. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.